So you have written two books that have to do with the representation of the Shoah in history, in film and literature. The Reflection of Nazism, an essay on Kitsch and Death in 1984, and the conference book on Probing the Limits of Representation. Let's talk about Kitsch and Death first. What caused you to write that book, and what is its essence?
Yeah, it's a book which I wrote in the late 70s and early 80s. I mean, it was published in French, and the title Réflexion du... you see, I make the mistake, which everybody makes. Reflet du nazisme. It was published in 83. Then it was redone really in its English American version and in its German version. And what didn't actually appear in the French title became the title in English and in German, Kitsch und Tod in German, Der Widerschein des Nazismus, something like that. What brought me to this was the sense that in the culture around me at that time, in the late 70s, from the mid-70s onwards, there was a new fascination with the Nazi epoch. There was the mode retro, you know, which even in fashion somehow went back to World War II styles. But mainly, I had the feeling that both in literature and mainly in film, although I'm no specialist in either domain, there was a series of sometimes very brilliant productions or books, but mainly film, which dealt with the period of the war of the Third Reich and of its representation in film, in new techniques. And you felt, whether you wished it or not, that it was, although it was always, let us say, morally on the right side, that is, nobody would say what a wonderful phenomenon Nazism was. No, of course not. But you had the sense that there was either a remodeling of what you would call moral responsibility, or a fascination with the aesthetics of the Nazi years. And so I wanted to write about this phenomenon. And I came to the conclusion by watching those things, not voluntarily, I mean, they came to me. Zilberberg's film, or Lili Marleen, or Joachim Fest's biography of Hitler, and so on and so forth. Manifestly, something was going on. And what struck me was the meeting in this representation of a kind of kitschy sentimentalism, Lili Marleen's songs, and I mean the song Lili Marleen, Marlene Dietrich, taken from the, I mean, I am referring now to Fassbinder's movie, the song taken from the British version to the German, and in a way, you know, the soldiers in their foxholes all Christmas listening to Lili Marleen. Of course, the great example of this kitsch is Zilberberg's film Our Hitler, in English, Hitler ein Film aus Deutschland, in German, and we can go over a few scenes if need be, but in any case, I had the sense that there was this aspect of the sentimentalism, the cheap kind of aesthetics, and the theme of utter destruction, and the two together were manifest in all those works as a repeated kind of aesthetic play. And then it occurred to me that actually these were components of Nazi quote-unquote fascination. The sentimentalism on the one hand, the Volksgemeinschaft, and the romanticism, the German romanticism, and I gave a lot of examples. Romanticism in its Nazi version, and this undertone of death and destruction and death. And the two together, the jolt between the two had something to do with the aesthetics of Nazism itself. So what I wrote was first about these productions of the 70s and, well, yes, the 70s. And then I reflected on this as being an element of the appeal, in quotes, of Nazism itself on a kind of almost unconscious level. So it was a small essay on the aesthetics of what at the time I didn't know how to define, but now I know what I was talking about. That is, I called it the new discourse about Nazism. In fact, this was postmodernism, you see. It was simply playing with Nazism. That is a postmodernist approach to what was, in a sense, before that, in a kind of moral framework. Now, the aesthetic play of a postmodernist cultural revolution, which I didn't know of simply. I was in my ignorance of the concept and of the phenomenon. I called it the new discourse, but this was simply a postmodern version of Lina Wertmüller and so on.
How was that book received in Germany?
In Germany, quite well. That is, it created a lot of discussions, debates with some of those who were attacked in the book. For example, I met with Sieberberg several times, and in discussions. And the discussions were very tense, to put it mildly. But it was, there were some very, very good articles in major papers. And it became a topic, not a huge one, but it, in France, fell flat completely. In Israel, it led to quite a few very interesting discussions.
What happened when you met with Sieberberg?
I met him, the first time I met him was in Jerusalem, where he came to present extracts of Our Hitler at the Cinematheque. And there was a debate half hour after not the whole film, of course, but extracts. And I remember my friend Amos Elon intervening. I forgot his intervention, but it was critical. And then I intervened also, saying that, of course, I'm sure he meant well, I mean Sieberberg, but that he recreated by his method of presenting the Nazi phenomenon by aestheticizing it so extremely he created, the risk was that the audience, mainly in Germany, would again breathe, in a sense, the grandiose performance of the Nazi period. He rejected that and was pretty upset by it. We had dinner afterwards, and there the discussion became much more animated. It ended in very rough emotions. And then I had another discussion with Silberberg in Munich, presenting the book to a German audience, packed. Silberberg entered, and again there was a big debate. And finally I met him again in Hamburg, again on a presentation of the book to a Hamburg audience, and more or less again the same scenario, whereby I understand. He told me something very, I would say, very on the spur of the moment in our discussion afterwards, which, you know, he is the generation, he must be my age. So again, it's the generation, I assume, I don't know, of the Hitler Youth. And so, I mean, they were mobilized psychologically by the system. And I said to Silberberg, not publicly, but afterwards, I said, but you make it fascinating. You are bringing back a fascination, even if your intention is totally different, but by your way of aestheticizing, you create a new fascination in a way. And he said, but it was fascinating. And I thought that it was authentic, it was, there was no reason not to say it. It was unreflected. Nazism indeed fascinated those who grew up in it. And of course you could say after that a lot of things have been disclosed about the epoch, and it's not really necessary to recreate the fascination in order to make you understand what Nazism was, but this was a kind of cri du cœur. Mais c'était fascinant.
Was he speaking French?
No. I'm speaking French.
Okay. Okay.
Es war faszinierend, is what he said. Es war ja faszinierend.
Yeah, well, he sometimes the emotion comes through the pores.
Yeah. No, but I you know, it was really a, how can I say, it was a genuine expression of feelings which were stuck somewhere in adolescence, you know, and were coming back. And that also explains for some part of the audience in Germany, a good example was Joachim Fest's film Hitler, eine Karriere, which was based on his biography of Hitler, but where you saw this kind of Titanic, you know, not Titanic in the sense of the ship, but as a sense of Titan, the rise to power and this immense power, and then a falling down in a kind of apocalypse, you see. So it came to this, the greatness of it. And the tragedy of it, Götterdämmerung, Wagnerian kind of Inszenierung.
Another case of German Romanticism.
Yes, late Romanticism.
Okay, let's go to the other event, a book which I think is very important, and a conference which was important. You organized in 92 the conference Probing the Limits of Representation.
In 91, I think.
91?
Okay. Well, the book came in 92, right?
Okay, you organized the conference in 91.
But it was based on an incident of 90.
Okay, tell me, what?
Well, it's a very interesting, actually, sequence. It was many years after, many years. The French Reflet du Nazisme came out in 83, so 7 years later, I attended a conference which took place at UCLA, where I'm still teaching, and a conference organized around a talk by Hayden White. Hayden White is a very well-known historian in the University of California, Santa Cruz. He now is retired, and I think he is a professor of the university. That means he belongs to the whole system and not to one campus. But whatever, he is well known among historians for his, I wouldn't say relativism, but for his theory that, in a way, the type of narration you use to explain the historical events you deal with create the truth of, or your choice of narration creates your explanation. I mean, if you choose a tragic mode or an ironic mode, these are rhetorical categories, then you write a certain type of history, a certain type of explanation. That is the rhetoric, in a way, the rhetoric emplotment, as he says, or the narrative emplotment, the way you present it in your narrative discourse will determine the type of arguments and the type of truth. That is, truth depends on the narration you choose and not on the events. You
literary constructs.
You have events which you have to construct them into a narrative which has an inner set of explanations, of logic, and so on. This narrative is not something neutral. You have to choose a rhetorical mode in order to narrate the events, ironically, tragically, whatever. And depending on what you choose, the result will be totally different. So that there is no absolute historical truth somewhere there, but there is a way of choosing your events and telling them, and the way you choose to tell them will create the historical truth you are trying to convey. So, in a sense, the truth of history doesn't depend on the events that were, but on the way you choose to tell them. A relativist kind of approach to historical emplotment, which had already created a lot of debates and discussions. And here was Hayden White in UCLA explaining that again. I forgot now the sharp formulae he used, but some were very sharp. And that created a clash between him and another very well-known historian who was at UCLA, Carlo Ginzburg. Carlo Ginzburg being here the representative of historical objectivity in a way of a scientific, scholarly way of writing history and coming closer and closer, if you wish, to truth. And Hayden White, as opposed to this, being in a sense a relativist, trying to say, well, all depends on what way you choose to tell your events. And the truth of the events will change with the way you narrate them. It created a very, very intense debate. And I then went talked to Hayden White and told him, look, this is all fine if you speak of most events. It will not create much, it will create a theoretical debate. But let us assume that we take Nazism and mainly the final solution, that is the extermination of the Jews and of other groups, if you want to add to it, and try to test your narrative relativism on these grounds, that is on the historical representation of Nazism and the final solution. Would you be ready to try that in a conference where all those interested would participate? He said yes. That led to the conference, which I organized, where you had major theoreticians in history, and of course the people I mentioned before, Carlo Ginzburg and others from UCLA, and it led to very intense and interesting confrontation of views, and to the book. You are mentioning Probing the Limits of Representation, Nazism and the Final Solution.
Yes. From it, I assumed that you are an anti-postmodernist.
Yes, but yes, of course I'm anti-postmodernist because of my sense that postmodernism pushed to its extremes, and I don't say that Hayden White, you see, retreated. In the conference which I'm mentioning, he excluded certain narrative modes from being used in representing extreme events of modern history, like the extermination of the Jews or other major human catastrophes of our time. Let's say the genocide of the Armenians or other events of that kind. He excluded irony and comedy as possible narrative employments. That is, he limited himself, which then some said, well, if you do that, you are almost undermining your whole position, right? But he did it in his presentation and tried to find a voice, to find a way of narrating extreme events like that. We will have another debate 20 years later, that is in 2011, on all this, on our discussions of 91, 20 years later. It's already decided that we will have Hayden White, myself, and probably others. And so yes, I am, of course, an anti-postmodernist, at least in history. Also, I can understand the problem that language creates, because language can be used in so many different ways, and all you express is expressed in language, so that language becomes really the matrix of what you try to represent. And the way you use language, of course, will influence the results of your discourse. But I felt that postmodernism in its ultimate setting was very close to historical revisionism, because after all, what do revisionists do about Nazism, and the final solution is to narrating it in a way which would put in question ultimately the very existence of the events. The answer to this is that they twist the facts, and that is not included in any of these postmodernist options. That is, the facts have to be carefully checked, and you change the narratives, and you play, let us say, with assembling the facts like Legos, which I'm not too happy about, but you do not twist them. But again, you could say, well, there are many ways then of reconfiguring events which can be checked and explaining them from various points of view, and the results you feel are pretty questionable. Apropos the concept of kitsch, it's very difficult to define kitsch. Somebody defined it. I think it's Broch, that this is the principle. That is the principle of evil in the work of art, or something like that. It is, if you think of it, it is extremely difficult to say what kitsch is. It's like with pornography. It's hard to define, but when you see it, you know it. You know it. And the same with kitsch. That is, it's, let us say, cheap sentimentalism. But what does that mean? It means probably a representation of an aesthetic representation which is supposed to draw immediate, unreflected emotions. That is, in kitsch, there is no reflection, there is no conceptualization, there is nothing between the representation and your immediate reaction. It's difficult to define, but you see, the Nazis themselves had problems with kitsch, and this is hardly known. They had a law against kitsch, a law which was announced in June, I think, of 1933. That is a few months after Hitler's coming to power, which forbade kitsch representations of the party, its leadership, its symbols, and so on. So as people didn't know what was meant, the newspapers at the time did give lists of things that were kitsch and lists of things that were true aesthetics. And I will give you an example, or a few examples as far as I remember them. It's so funny because very few people know about this law. The law said, for example, that using a football with the swastika on it was forbidden. This was kitsch. Or selling salami with swastika carved in there was forbidden. But having a Christmas tree with the image of the Führer and light shining through it, this was absolutely allowed aesthetics. So in a way, the worst kitsch, of course, they considered as aesthetics, and selling the salami with the swastika was bad. Well, but there is a more serious question. There is a difference in Milan Kundera, The Unbearable Lightness of Being. He uses kitsch. I know Kundera, and we discussed that. after reading his novel. And there you have communist manifestations on the 1st of May, I think, or in Prague, and he says the communist kitsch he describes as this apotheosis of life or of future, long-live life. That was communist kitsch, and so on. And he says that people actually were forced to stand there and to admire and to be ecstatic, but in fact, they were either hostile or indifferent, which was not the case with Nazism. And I wondered why actually, very often indeed, in these big communist manifestations, not probably in the early days of the Soviet regime or of the communist movements, but in the later phases, this whole exhilaration really very often fell flat, and you felt this was whereas observers of Nazi rallies and so on said, as Zieberberg told me, aber es war ja faszinierend, but it was fascinating. Now why? And if you notice, if indeed Kundera is right, that communist kitsch is an optimistic kind of song to life, like the motto of l'Humanité in France, with the communist newspaper, was, in my time, Les lendemains qui chantent, which is a sentence from Vaillant Couturier, the tomorrows that sing, you know, that's kind of communist kitsch. Not in Nazism. Nazism was a kitsch of death. That is sacrifice, the altar with the flames, the heroic death, the SS with the death signs on their uniforms and so on. Nazism was an apotheosis of the veneration of martyrdom, sacrifice, death, the hopeless struggle, the element of the Wagnerian Götterdämmerung, and throughout the ring, actually, those sense of eventual destruction of the gods, and it was a kitsch, therefore, much closer to Christian religious feelings of the ultimate sacrifice, of course, of the Savior, and the valley of sorrow before you reach redemption, and the possibility of damnation or of destruction, and the idea of apocalypse. So I would say that there is a much deeper religious foundation in Nazi kitsch than in the communist one, although both are considered as kind of secularized religions. But this emphasis on death and sacrifice in Nazism versus the emphasis on life and triumph in communism explains the fascination of the one and the flatness of the other.
Okay. There's in the German version of the book, Death and Kitsch, Tod und Kitsch und Tod, you also talk about the fears of trivialization of the Shoah, and you mentioned the American television series Holocaust.
Yes. I was very much, when I wrote this, probably at the end of the 70s, I was very much pondering Holocaust, which I had seen here in the United States. I was on a visit for a year at MIT of all places, not as a professor of physics, but in the humanities department. And it was, I think, 78, if I'm not mistaken. And that was the first time Holocaust was shown on television, and I, of course, watched it as everybody else. Today, I mean, it's unbearable. You cannot watch Holocaust again. Even at that time, it was, for me at least, and for many others, who knew anything about the topic, it was difficult to stomach because of this Hollywoodesque representation of the events with wonderful Hollywood actors and Meryl Streep and who else, I forgot the names, but this was, going to extermination camps or whatever, fighting in the Warsaw Ghetto with the most handsome actors that Hollywood could find, was pretty strange. I remember Elie Wiesel writing a furious kind of article against the series in an op-ed, I think, at the New York Times or whatever. But there is another aspect to that which honestly we have to mention. It was the first big television film about the Holocaust, as it's called here. The term Shoah came with Lanzmann's film Shoah. And I remember being somewhere in Maine. We were in Massachusetts, but traveled to Maine for a weekend for whatever reason. And at noon, we were in a kind of, let's say, restaurant in a very small place in Maine. And there were a few large tables in the room where we were having lunch. And in the table next to us, there was a very large family with elder people, the grandparents probably, and parents and children, and a very lively discussion. And I couldn't but listen because it was just next to me. And the lively discussion was about Holocaust. That is, about the film, but also about the events. That is, did you know this and that? Oh, no, I didn't know. And you realize that this has entered into the public for the first time, into the wide television public in a country like America, the United States. And you know, when it was shown in Germany, it was first shown on the third channel or something like that, not ZDF and not the ARD, not the big channels, but a much smaller one, because the others didn't want to show it. And then the audience became so large that when it ended and when the phone calls came to the debaters or whatever, the phone centrale crashed because millions of people wanted to. We didn't know of all that. I mean, to make it short and obvious, the answer to the kitschy aspect of it is that it was the way, it was the Hollywood way, but it was the only way of making wide audiences, millions of people, aware of events which they pretended or didn't pretend of not ever having heard about. And I said that to Lanzmann on several occasions. I mean, I'm a great admirer, as many of us are, most of us, I am sure, of Shoah, which is, I think, the unsurpassed movie rendition of the Shoah, of the Holocaust. But even over the years, Shoah demanded a very, I mean, it was a totally different audience. These were people, this Shoah couldn't be watched by millions and millions who would watch Schindler's List, let's say, but not, or of course, Holocaust in those years. Shoah is a much more select audience of people who usually know already what it's all about and can follow the nuances of these 9 hours or whatever. So if you think that it's important for vast audiences to know something minimal, the question is what, of course, but something about the fact of this extermination and other events like that, then this kind of movies, television movies, television miniseries like Holocaust cannot be completely dismissed, although all the kitsch in the world was there. Also the music and so on. Shoah is for an intellectual segment that in any case is well informed already of what is being shown or will be shown on television.